So a key point with hope-based communications is it's not about ignoring the problem or the thing we're against. It's about putting it in context of how things should be instead. So we will always show the problem, but the point is if we only show the problem, people start to take it as a new reference point of how things are, and they start to accept that's just how the world is. And what we need to do is put the problem in the context of the solution. So essentially, hope is not about feeling positive or optimistic or happy for its own sake. It's about the idea that tomorrow can be better. Climate change is a great example, right? A lot of the communication is built on fear. You could sum it up by Extinction Rebellion's message, we're all fucked. But if we're all fucked and we've only 10 years to go, why should I give up my car? So where climate change communication is much more effective is like showing, well, actually, look, a lot of societies are already shifting to sustainable energy. We can get this done. People want to fix these problems. It's when they feel that nothing can be done about it and they get the sense of hopelessness. It's actually been shown with research, it's called the despondency effect. That once people think nothing can be done about it, then obviously they're less likely to take action. A beautiful video that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez made with The Intercept a year or two ago around the Green New Deal was called A Letter from the Future, where she shows people, here's how we got the Green New Deal done, and here's what the world looked like once it was put in place. And so the challenge for us is, can we show people what will the society look like when there are human rights friendly migration policies, or just in general, what's the world human rights groups are trying to achieve? Think of it this way. Have you ever gotten on a train without knowing the final destination of that train? That's what we're putting in front of our audiences if we don't try and explain to them what it is we're trying to create. The very word change to us obviously sounds positive, just like the word activist, but for a lot of audiences, the sort of ordinary people, change can also be frightening, right? There's also a risk of loss. So can we show people not just what they stand to lose by not doing anything, but also what they stand to gain by acting and supporting us? And also, once AOC put forward this idea of the Green New Deal, she got criticized, right? Lots of people started attacking her. And that's something that often worries human rights activists. Like, if we talk about solutions, we're just going to be attacked for them. What if they don't work? But the point is, people started attacking the Green New Deal, but they were talking about the Green New Deal. So as we start to articulate our solutions and our values, we need to be confident that as long as people are talking about them, then those ideas, remember, are firing up in the brain of our audience. And as we saw, it's now a policy priority for the European Commission. If we don't talk about that world we want to see, nobody will. And if nobody talks about that world we want to see, then it has no chance of becoming reality. And once we start articulating these bold ideas, then more people are those people who actually agree with us and who are currently silent in despondency, people, for example, who don't articulate, why can't we just help refugees and migrants, because all they see in the media is negativity around it, actually have a chance to start supporting us. So just to take this climate example as something we need to apply in migration, this is a field of literature I'm showing you now called solar punk. So you've probably seen examples of cyberpunk. It's movies like The Matrix or Blade Runner, a dystopian dark world, right, where the climate is terrible. There's been a nuclear war sometimes. This is a field of literature where they say, here's what the world looks like if we actually achieve a more sustainable and green society. So starting to fire up the imagination, putting a picture in people's mind of here's what the world could look like if we do the work, and if we actually implement those policies we're talking about. And so this is the key idea, this idea of the Overton window. This is the idea that you can have ideas that are unthinkable and radical. So these radical ideas, through repetition, can start to become more familiar to people. So again, thinking of that, those neurons in the brain as muscles that are getting more and more fired up. And now the next time people in the States, for example, will hear something about climate change, maybe they'll think, oh, Green New Deal. Maybe that's something, maybe that is acceptable and sensible. And so that eventually those ideas will shift to the mainstream where they're more likely to become policy. So we've seen this work against us on migration. A lot of the ideas on migration 5 or 6 years ago would have been unthinkable and radical. And then you had people like Nigel Farage, who I showed you in that photo earlier. And obviously we then issue press releases saying, did you hear what this politician said? It's terrible. Here's his message. He's so wrong to sort of say that refugees are cockroaches. And we repeat their message. So it becomes more and more familiar to people until the point that you have now, where you have mainstream politicians saying, oh, we should be tougher on migration. That's the sensible thing to do. So when we're working on narrative, actually our goal is on really summing narrative work up. It's actually just about repeating over and over again and articulating in many different ways, both visually, with words, with frames, with metaphor, thinking of as many different ways as possible of repeating the same basic ideas and ways of thinking as much as possible so that they build, and also having other people repeat them for us so they achieve salience, so that they are stronger part of the debate, so that they are actually shifting to this point where human rights are popular and therefore are more likely to be policy. To me, the leading communications expert in the world today is Anat Shenker-Osorio, but her basic message is, when we work on messaging, we're not trying to just say what's popular. So when we do our audience research and we find that people think a certain way, say people might think of themselves as their nation, but not as European. We're not just looking for the most popular thing to say to get media coverage. What we're trying to work on is, how do we make popular what needs to be said? So what are the ideas that motivate all of us here to be today? How do we articulate them? What is the framing? What is the words? What we want to use our audience research and all the other forms of testing, we're using those to make popular these basic core ideas. And so with this Overton window, it feels kind of depressing right now how many unthinkable and radical sort of populist anti-human rights ideas have become mainstream. But what we can start to take courage from is that there are ideas for us that feel radical, maybe acceptable, if not quite popular, that we can actually have strategies to start working on repeating them and being more consistent in making the case for our values. And I think the really most important thing when we look at all the research on migration is, we haven't lost people. We've lost the narrative in the last few years, but the vast majority of people share our values. It's just a question of, are we activating those values when it comes to this debate, instead of that fear and that sense of mortality and risk and danger and flooding and all these ideas that right now the other side have been very good at activating in these debates. So what I want you to start thinking about is, how would the world look like if you were to succeed in your work on migration? If you basically were all to decide, okay, we don't actually need to do any more human rights work on migration because everything is fine. If essentially, you know, whatever your calls are were accepted and implemented, how would society look? And the crucial thing here is, think, how will society look? Not for the rights holders, who hopefully won't face these abuses anymore. How will society look for your audience? So what does daily life look like?